Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our launch seminar of the Native Species Aquaculture Alliance. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are based. Just as a quick heads up before we start, we are recording this webinar, so I hope that's okay with everyone. We will be sharing the slides and the recording afterwards. Great. I will just do a quick introduction of why we have launched the NSSA, and then I will hand over to our speakers for today, and we will have a panel discussion afterwards with a Q&A. Right. So why have we decided to launch the NSSA? Aquaculture, as we know, is the world's fastest growing food production sector and is cornerstone of global food security. But at the moment, it has been driven mainly by a few non-native and highly domesticated species. At the same time, there is a strong conservation agenda, which has often been disconnected from commercial aquaculture. And NSAA wants to bridge conservation, science, and commercial practice for native and indigenous species and encourage research on the positive impacts and potential of natives, which at the moment remains relatively understudied and under-resourced. So to do that, Sustain and Tanganyika Blue, who have been working together as pioneers in native species farming on Lake Tanganyika, have initiated the NSAA. To create a global platform to bring different stakeholders and native species together. So our mission is to catalyze collaboration, research, and investment in aquaculture systems based on native species that support biodiversity, resilient livelihoods, and sustainable food production. And I'll just briefly talk you through what we hope to do with the NSAA, and we look forward to discussions on this further on what 2026 could look like. As we know, native species aquaculture might be a new concept, but it's not a new practice. So we want to provide a platform for people to connect in this space. So we will be creating a database for native species aquaculture companies, partners, and projects to get an overview of the landscape beyond Lake Tanganyika across the world. We will also be producing a collaborative white paper outlining enabling conditions, risks, financing models, and partnership frameworks. We will agree on joint investment, research, and policy priorities and foster partnership opportunities and knowledge sharing amongst like-minded stakeholders. And we also hope to host future webinar series like the one today, where we can highlight research and case studies across regions. So I will just briefly speak you through the roadmap for today, what we'll be doing for the next 2 hours. So after this introduction, Dr. Rohana Subasinghe will be giving us an overview of the global context and rationale behind native species aquaculture, followed by Alex Chetkovich from Tanganyika Blue, who will be presenting a case study from Lake Tanganyika. And then we've got Severin from Sustain, who will provide an investment perspective from Lake Tanganyika as well. Then we have Dr. Imani Kapinga from TNC, who will focus on the conservation efforts that are currently being made in policy. Then we have David Patrick Nkhwazi from Lake Malawi Aquaculture, and he will provide a second case study, this time from Lake Malawi, Nyasa. And then last but not least, we've got Dr. Suleiman Ihiabe, and he will provide more of a scientific perspective on genetic breeding programs. And then we have a panel discussion between all the speakers to get the discussion going a bit further. And then we have an open forum where we will have a Q&A. So please feel free to use the chat to ask your questions. We won't be doing a Q&A after each speaker speaks. And I'll be collecting those questions from the chat as we go along. Also feel free to just introduce yourself in the chat and tell us where you're from, what organization you're with. And if we can't answer all questions because of time, fear not, we will be sure to collect them, and that will shape the future work of NSAA. So today is just the start, the launch of this process, and yeah, we're happy to have you here with us today. So I will pass over to Dr. Rohana, and he will provide us the global context overview. Dr. Rohana, over to you.
Good morning, Afternoon, evening, wherever you are. Annemarie, thank you very much. I'm not going to take too long. I'll just give you a very simple and short introduction to this subject, of which is an extreme interest to me too. Um, the Although you see a pretty nice tropical background on your screen, I'm sitting in a cold England. The outside temperature is 4 degrees, and sort of it is 8, 10 minutes past 8 my time. Next slide, please. I represent Future Fish. Future Fish is a company based in United Kingdom, and we provide services to many agencies, including some of the banks, the Gates Foundation, sort of private sector. And so focusing on small scale aquaculture particularly, and our interest is Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia and Southeast Asia. And we've been involved in moving species from place to place. And a couple of years ago, I was involved in a project with the World Fish where we moved improved gift tilapia, Oreochromis niloticus, a gift variety from Malaysia to Nigeria. That was an interesting experience for us. The process of moving an animal from one place to the other. So that's where we start talking about native species and introduced species. If you look at the species used in aquaculture, you can see on the screen, according to FAO, we do more than 500 species, whereas about 15 species making 70% of the production. Whereas so many other species produce in various geographies, at various levels and various, sort of practices, small amounts. So according to FAO, about 180 species of the farm of these 500 are farmed outside their native range. So introduced species means that when animal is established outside their native range, as an interesting word, native range. What is the native range, right? And introduced species are essential for aquaculture growth. It has contributed significantly to aquaculture growth. There are so many good examples. Atlantic salmon is one of the best examples of a particular sector improved so much. Species interaction has risks always. When you cross the road, there is a risk. Similarly, for anything of moved animal, live animal, or even a product moving from place to place has a risk. So, on the other hand, if you are using a native species, whether it is improved or not, in a location and in an environment, that particular risk of bringing something in is no longer there. Next slide, please. When you look at a native species. For an example, in Tanganyika Lake, you find native species. If you check Oreochromis niloticus, is it native to which part of Africa? Of course, you need to really understand the history and sort of where it come from and what's the origin and which catchment and which river basin and sort of. So most of the species do not have the adequate growth rate to make aquaculture productive for using native species. That's one of the most problems that we always face. Many species prone to and susceptible to disease. The diseases move from place to place. We call them TADs or transboundary pathogens. The pathogens move. So when in a native species, unless you have improved into a be resistant or to whatever, and they become always uh, prone to and susceptible. Many species are comparatively less researched. If you look at a lot of native species are less researched, so we don't know much about them. Without knowing much about a species, it's not very easy to use that species for a commercial or sort of a a profitable, productive production system. So program to improve performance, genetic growth, disease resistance seems to be inadequate for many native species. Use of locally improved native species in aquaculture does not pose environmental threats that what Annemarie just mentioned, and which is an important integrated part of this journey of improving aquaculture production, making aquaculture commercial. Next slide, please. Generally, species are introduced to address a demand. Why do you want to move an animal to a place? Because if you want to make it, why there is a demand. So the demand, and normally if you want to do it for the demand, normally an animals are improved for enhanced aquaculture production. So that means either genetically improved or they have a sort of a disease resistance type capacity in that particular strain. Therefore, introduction generally include improved genetics. National and or regional policies and regulations governing species introduction are not consistent throughout the world. Even within a region, different countries have different laws, policies, regulatory sort of structures for bringing germplasm into a country, allowing it or not. So there are policy and regulatory issues which either support or prevent introductions. You can see it in Africa, you can see it in sub-Saharan Africa and elsewhere. So where introductions are allowed, compliance with the legal and institutional requirements is also not easy. It's fairly complex. What compliance is required to bring an animal. So if you are using a native species, all these problems no longer exist, right? The problem is that animal is fit to be for commercial aquaculture. Next slide, please.
Great, thank you.
This is just a graph to show you the different species of or different varieties of Oreochromis niloticus and comparing with Oreochromis tanganyika. And the one that with the highest growth where you can see is the gift tilapia sort of. And you can see the difference in the growth rates. You can see the difference in performance. Next slide, please. This one is a comparison of Lake Tanganyika, Oreochromis tanganyika and Oreochromis niloticus gift variety, which was done in 2022 with an extrapolated growth curve, linear growth, to showing how much the difference in growth rates of an improved variety. Native varieties are good and we should encourage as much as possible to use in aquaculture and make them commercially productive and commercially viable. Having said that, you need to improve them. You need to make them the right candidate for commercial aquaculture, without which your practice and system might not become profitable. Next slide, please. So in a situation like what type of action is required when you look at for you to make aquaculture using the native species, make aquaculture more commercial and profitable and productive, you need to look at what traits are required for improvement, and whether it is genetics, whether it is health, whether it is something else, feeds, there are so many aspects. And I think there's plenty of opportunity for us to dig into, deep dive into the real requirements to understand through better research and through improvements into species, local species for commercial aquaculture. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Rohana, for those insights. That's been a great introduction. Then over to Alex, please, from Tanganyika Blue.
Thanks, Annemarie. Thanks, Dr. Rohana, for a lot of context on sort of the challenge that we face, but also the opportunity. Yeah, luckily a lot of people in this webinar already know Tanganyika Blue, but I'm just here to introduce our work and show how we've been trying to make native species aquaculture a reality. So yeah, this is us. This is a photo of our farm site in Ihiabe. We like to think that this is our mission. So we're attempting to create an industry that is employing thousands, feeding millions, and also safeguarding an ecosystem and creating a new model of aquaculture in the world's most important tropical lake. Next slide, Annemarie, thanks. So just very briefly about Lake Tanganyika, a lot of people will be familiar with it already. It's a global marvel, really. It's 12 million years old. It's the second oldest lake in the world. It contains an almost mind-baffling 17% of the world's surface fresh water, liquid fresh water, is in this lake. There's over 300 endemic species in the lake. People keep finding more. It's one of those things, every time people go looking, they find new species. That 12 million years has been a lot of evolution, and so it's a globally recognized biodiversity hotspot. And it is, unfortunately, one of the world's last pristine freshwater ecosystems. Thanks, Annemarie. There's a challenge facing Lake Tanganyika, and basically, the wild catch is down 20% in the last 10 years. That's an estimate, and that often is just looking at total biomass taken out of the lake. When really, if we think about how many more people are fishing, there's a lot more effort going into catching a lot fewer fish. Climate change, population growth, unsustainable fishing practices have all contributed to this drop. There's a huge number of people, 20 million people, live in and around the Lake Tanganyika basin, and that number is only going up. It's going to double in the next 20 years. So with a declining catch and an increasing population, the conditions are right for aquaculture, and aquaculture will fill this market gap one way or another. Next, thanks, Annemarie. So this is the downside that we're all familiar with. Business as usual quite likely would be one of those 15 species that account for 70% of aquaculture production being introduced to the lake. And we've seen it time and again. It's a consistent story. Invasive species are a consistent threat to ecosystems. They will change an environment. We've seen it in Africa a few times, in Lake Victoria, Lake Volta, and across obviously in South America as well, in the Amazonian basin. The next slide, thanks, Annemarie. So this is what our solution looks like. This is what we call our concept map. So this is native species aquaculture, very visually represented. So yeah, there's a lot going on here, and as Annemarie mentioned, the presentations will be shared around, so you can have a look at this one later. But you can see on the side there, these are the sort of the four elements. So there's a hatchery and a very important breeding program. This is what's needed. You saw those growth curves before, and we're lucky to have Suleiman talk more about this later on today. And then so there's a hatchery and a breeding program. Of course, fish grow out in cages. Cold chain and distribution is important. People need to make money from this, otherwise it won't catch on. And so we've got to get the fish to market. I'll speak a little bit about that later, not too much. And then smallholder outreach and extension services. There's huge potential for smallholders to be involved in aquaculture, but only under the right conditions. There's been a lot of development programs have died a death in smallholder aquaculture, but we think we can make a difference here, and if it's set up the right way. And the next one, thanks, Annemarie. This just goes briefly to what I'm talking about, where we say aquaculture will fill that gap. You can see the graph there. The wild capture fisheries is flat at best, but the population is not. The population of just Tanzania alone is going to double from what's already over 60 million now, double in the next 25 years to 120 million. And that has if fish consumption stays consistent, at a conservative estimate, currently at 7 kilograms a year, which is down from the global average of 20. That's a huge production gap that aquaculture is going to fill. Something like from 15,000 tons to 500,000 tons are needed in the next 20 years. Next slide, thanks. And so this is how we go about it. These are the sort of 4 elements, and these obviously fairly closely relate to the map before. Sorry, the concept map before. Selective breeding program to improve the growth and economic performance of the Tanganyika tilapia. We've got grow it in cages. We've got market branding and distribution. But we also, because we're starting out here, we're one of the early movers on the lake. We want to be involved in the industry regulation. So that's working with governments, and specifically for us, that's the ministry, who's very collaborative here in Tanzania, Tafiri, who've been great to work with, people like Dr. Imani, who we're talking with, who will be speaking later on today as well. We have a chance to sort of set some scientifically backed industry standards to sort of set this industry up on hopefully the right footing. Next slide, thanks, Annemarie. I think the key, we've been going for a little while. We're not super advanced, but we're moving forward. And I think the key takeaway to date so far is that the Tanganyika tilapia has a commercially valid growth profile. Now, that wasn't a given. We saw those growth files before. It's not gift tilapia, but we can make it work. And we have been so far. So, just a few photos from our side here. You can see that drone shot is us stocking our nursing cages. There's obviously harpernets in ponds, and that's an aerial shot of our sites where we've installed our own solar panels, and you can see we're right on the lake. I just want to mention at this point, we're a big shout out and thank you to Tafiri. We've been working with them for several years and hosted under their umbrella at their facility, and we wouldn't have got this far without their support, and also to the ministry as well, the Ministry of Livestock and Fisheries. Previously, Dr. Imani was an excellent employee of the ministry. She's jumped ship to TNC, but she's been very supportive, and other people as well. So they've been great support to us. One more, thanks, Annemarie. So that's all. So this is a little bit of what we know so far from working with Tanganyika tilapia. We saw Dr. Rohana's growth curves before, and this is one that we've produced ourselves from our own data. This is actually from a growth curve from 3 grams. So you can see from 3 grams up until say 350 or 400 grams, which we might be plate size. You're looking at 250 days. So the growth curve is slow, but we'd like to think that with a breeding program that can be improved. There's on egg production, there's a lower, compared to Niloticus, there's a lower fecundity of eggs, but a much higher survival rate, which is an interesting sort of reproduction strategy from a different species. And the eggs are much larger, which probably goes to the survival rate, I guess. They're a highly kinetic fish. So this probably goes to the point about them being still fairly non-domesticated and wild. It means you need to be careful with handling when you're doing crowding, when you're sampling, whatever. They'll jump about, and they'll obviously injure themselves. The nutritional requirements might be slightly different from Niloticus. We're obviously using commercial feed, which is for Niloticus in general. And we've seen some differences working with ABA, who's here today as well. Possibly the fat content of the feed might be one area to look at. That's a long game, but it shows that there's room for potential there as well. And super importantly, they're absolutely delicious. We have customers in Kigoma specifically asking in shops for our fish or for the Tanganyika blues, Tanganyika tilapia, rather than the Niloticus, which is available from Lake Victoria very much. Now, of course, ours is nearer, it's fresher, it's all those things, but genuinely, it's delicious. And again, just talk about lucky. If they were not that tasty, we wouldn't particularly have a viable industry. So that one's really key. Next one, thanks, Annemarie. So that's all the sunshine. Here's a few operational realities for us. Lake Tanganyika is rough, deep, and often very exposed. So the number of cage sites is limited, and TNC is doing some work on this. We've been involved on site selection from an environmental perspective, but also just viability. You know, an exposed site needs a lot more capex. You know, we have the usual infrastructure issues in a remote location. There's no ice available. We have our own ice machine now. Power connection to the grid was expensive, hence we put in solar panels. So there's some things which apply for everyone. Tanzania does not have a big aquaculture industry, and that translates into a lack of mid-career aquaculture professionals. We've got a couple of people who we work with from the region, but Tanzania itself, homegrown talent is not there yet. However, we have several young graduates, and to be honest, I'm not just saying this, they are really fantastic. So we get people who write us letters to come and be interns. They've got a diploma in aquaculture, and they are, to a man and woman, been really fantastic. So the future is bright, but there's a struggle there at the moment. And I think probably just goes to the first point there. I think ponds are most likely the route for smallholders, given that there are a paucity of lake sites. And that photo, just because I wanted to put a photo, that photo is of our reef cubes, which are, we're testing something with Gatsby and our friends from Arc Marine. I see Ferrante is here today as well, using reef cubes as mooring blocks, in replacement of traditional mooring blocks, and seeing what sort of ecosystem services they provide. The next slide for us. Thanks, Annemarie. Very briefly on our expansion plans, this is where we're going. So over the next 5 years, we want to develop the species to be at least as competitive with the invasive alternatives. So that's all the breeding program. And so that's an ambitious goal, but in 5 years, we believe it, hopefully we believe it can be done. More people who know a lot more about that will speak later. On our personal side, we're looking to increase our production to 3,000 tonnes per annum, which is over 8.5 million meals being produced on our farm every year. And we have a hatchery, so we hope to produce something like 50 million native species fingerling produced annually from our facility for our own use, but also for smallholders, for other businesses, extending to our friends in Burundi, potentially across the lake, Congo and Zambia as well. Next slide, thanks, Annemarie. This relates to the previous slides. You know, the livelihood impact is significant. Over those 5 years, if we achieve those other goals, we're going to talk about, 3,000 smallholders across Lake Tanganyika being involved. And for each smallholder, there's an additional 2.6 jobs created in on-farm labor, in distribution, in marketing. So, really a huge number of people in an industry which doesn't exist at the moment. 11,000 new livelihoods through the value chain. And through that value chain from our place and the smallholders, that's a more than 20 million high-protein, low-cost meals produced per annum. Next slide, thanks, Annemarie. So Tanganyika Blue and the Native Species Aquaculture Alliance, we really want to make Lake Tanganyika a bit of a case study that can show what can be done when we take a viable candidate and turn it into an industry. And basically, while we're doing that, work out what looks like a playbook, what looks like a replicable set of steps for taking a potential candidate of a wild or non-domesticated species and turning it into an industry. We hope that we can eliminate food insecurity, I should say, and livelihood drivers. We hope we eliminate the food security and livelihood drivers that are there that would make people introduce something to the lake. And I think it's important to acknowledge that we owe it to people as well, not to hold back human development. If we all believe that jobs and economic growth and increasing prosperity, if they all help people, and particularly people in poverty, if we help, we think they help. By extension, things that hold that back hurt people. And this includes environmental concerns and regulations. And those of us, and I include myself in this group, who wish to preserve an amazing ecosystem or a biodiversity, we must recognize that if we do this comes at a human cost, and particularly when we do it in a developing country. So for us who think that's important, we need to work doubly hard to find alternative ways for those people who are living in poverty. And I see this as part of the promise of native species aquaculture. We want to protect Lake Tanganyika, and that's great, but it's not politically realistic or even humane to think that we can do that at the cost of the people who the cost of denying people development and jobs and food security. Next slide, thanks. Thanks, Annemarie. So that's us. We think we have a unique opportunity to secure an ecosystem, not through the exclusion of people, which is often what happens with conservation, with drawing a line and saying you cannot pass here, but rather through the inclusion of a sustainable livelihood creation. And I'm really happy to share that all with you today. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Alex, for that case study from Lake Tanganyika. That's been great to hear. And we'll move straight on to Severin, to provide an investor perspective, also linked to Lake Tanganyika. But yeah, go for it, Sev.
Thanks a lot, Annemarie. Yeah, hello from my side also. And I'm going to be talking into the void for the next 10 minutes, so bear with me. I want to give you a little bit of a perspective from an investment side, like how we sustain, how we look at native species aquaculture as an investment potential. And showcase this with Lake Tanganyika, because we are an active investor in 2 businesses so far on Lake Tanganyika on the Tanzanian side. As mentioned, so we have invested in Alex's business, basically. So Tanganyika Blue is one of our portfolio companies. And then we also have another smaller scale hatchery, Orychromis tanganyikae hatchery, that's in the south of Lake Tanganyika, also on the Tanzanian side. So we have a couple of years of experience with the species and also with the lake. And our approach, on the one side, we invest, we work with businesses, but we also see that if you want to do something like that, you really have to take an ecosystem approach, basically. You have to work together with a lot of different organizations to actually make this work. So apart from our investments, we also build initiatives and consortiums around private sector development on the lake in aquaculture. So we work together with TAFIRI, Tanzanian Fisheries Research Institute, also with the Ministry of Livestock and Fisheries in Tanzania, as well as TADB, which is the Tanzanian Agriculture Development Bank. We work with small-scale fish farmers, and including also all the partners in this panel, actually, and quite a few more. Recently, we've also started engaging with some stakeholders on the Burundian side. That's also very interesting. So as an investor, like, why should I care about native species aquaculture? And I mean this more in like an extended way. So I'm not talking about the environmental side, because I think we already heard that all makes sense, but more also like, when it actually comes to getting a return on investment. So Lake Tanganyika is a very good example, because there's regulatory environment that doesn't allow you to do invasive species, or a fast-growing domesticated strain is not possible to be farmed in the lake at the moment. So one aspect that, or potential opportunity that NSA gives us, is we can enter new geographies. We can also start farming new species, which are sometimes quite interesting also from a market perspective. A second point, which I think is quite central, is the whole aspect around biosecurity. So I think it's quite interesting when we think about Lake Tanganyika as an aquaculture ecosystem relying on its own native species. That kind of also helps to inhibit introduction of pathogens and viruses. Normally a downside, obviously, also if you introduce germplasm from somewhere else, is that you can also introduce the diseases and pathogens. So that was an issue, for example, in Lake Volta over the last couple of years. And then one aspect that I'm pretty excited about, it kind of ties into the species, but we have seen, obviously, there's a long-term potential of kind of moving away from a commodity to like more a branded product. Because let's say, in Lake Tanganyika, we develop an aquaculture sector based on a specific species, on Tanganyika tilapia, for example. That will always enable us to distinguish from the global Nile tilapia sector, basically. So there's an interesting upside potential for that. And then also for us as an investor, it's also interesting because we can invest in something like genetics. So which is, yeah, it's an interesting asset, basically. We can also build know-how, and yeah, that other investors might not have that, or other companies might not have that. So we can build a moat. And yeah, that's quite interesting. Then the last point, I'll go into this a bit later in detail. Yeah, a few things just overall about Lake Tanganyika region. So obviously, if you invest money somewhere, it's always good to look at the macro perspective also. And there's quite a few things that stand out in Lake Tanganyika region, also when it comes to Lake Tanganyika. So as Alex mentioned, it's a very, very huge, it's a big, big lake. The area is quite big. It's not the largest by area, but it's especially the volume of water that is exceptionally big. It's also very deep. So what that kind of leads to is that the water quality is like, yeah, it's super exceptional. It's very, very good water quality, which obviously is an important aspect when you do aquaculture in a lake like that. Then on the population side, the 4 countries around the lake, or especially the regions around the lake, they're all very fast growing. So the population growth is around 3 to 4%, which also, yeah, is interesting from a market perspective. And then we have seen over the past decade or so that fish prices have been increasing drastically. And also tied to that is we see that Lake Tanganyika in general has a bit of a premium. So fish coming from Lake Tanganyika actually has an even higher price than fish coming from the other lakes. That's mostly tied to quality, because the lake is very pristine, the water quality is very, very good. Taste is a bit different also. And then a last point is also, yeah, the lake has huge biodiversity, and there's many, many candidates that that could potentially be interesting for fish farming in that sense. So at the moment we focus on Tanganyika tilapia, but there's a few other species that might actually also be interesting. On the map you also see our those are the 2 locations of, so the one on the upper side, that's Tanganyika blue. The one on the lower side is the hatchery I mentioned. It's called the Tanganyika Aqua Hub. So our sector vision, I think, like, it's really important for us to understand, yeah, what's actually the potential of this, right? So this is a bit like what we have developed from our side, or what we think the whole aquaculture space could look like. There's a lot of assumptions going into that, but obviously as an investor, you have to do that. So yeah, some very simple back of the envelope calculations are included here, but we have to simplify things. So from our side, we see, because the lake is so pristine, it's so big, water volume is very large, that the volume of production, like in a sustainable way, is actually, yeah, it's potentially very high. So a number that I've been floating around is around 400,000 tons. That probably in that area is probably like the carrying capacity of the lake, or somewhere, yeah, where the industry could scale to, but still have no negative impact on the lake in the long term. It could also be half of that. So this is an assumption. And as I write here, it's basically the details we have to leave to the scientists here, because it's quite complicated. So there's currently a lot of effort going into this, also from the transboundary body called Lake Tanganyika Authority, and also institutions like Tafiri, but also, yeah, Imani, who is speaking later, is actually also working on this. So for example, there's a ROMS model that is being developed, which is a regional ocean modeling system. So figuring out the carrying capacity with very calculation heavy model. And then there's a lot of work that needs to be done on zoning. So where can we actually put those cages? Because that also matters a lot. But from an investment perspective, our assumption is we can potentially scale this industry in the whole lake, maybe to around 400,000 tons. So what does that mean? Yeah, if we by 2050, if the sector could scale to 400,000 tons, that would mean, you know, we are basically looking at $1 billion primary aquaculture sector potential only within this lake. And these assumptions are quite conservative in the way of like we also estimate that once production increases, that fish prices go down, and also feed prices go down once the sector matures. But that's obviously also really good because in the end, we want to produce fish for people to consume. And so it's important that we can make it as affordable as possible. But yeah, it's basically the number $1 billion, somewhere around there. So that definitely makes it interesting from an investment perspective. And then, yeah, on the other side, obviously also impact and socioeconomic impact that we can achieve with the sector is substantial. So what would that mean if we do 400,000 tons around the lake? And I don't mean us as a company, but I mean the whole ecosystem, obviously. So that would mean you could have 80,000 smallholder farmers or primary sector employment, so in production, plus around 200,000 secondary value chain employees, so in processing, downstream, upstream value chains. And yeah, looking at the GDP, so also modeling the GDP according to the growth rates, that would mean the sector could approximately add 5% to the regional GDP next to basically the vicinity of the lake. So yeah, that's the one point that I said I'm going to go into a bit more in detail. So one thing that we also see has very high potential with native species aquaculture is that the playing field is much more level than in areas where we can bring in invasive species or germplasm from somewhere else. So there's a lot of space for small scale production. There's a lot of space for SMEs, for smallholders. So what we at the moment what we have seen also in Lake Tanganyika is basically Tanganyika Blue is a bit of an anchor farm. But all the other farms that have been popping up, they're mostly small scale producers. There's mostly or local SMEs that are interested. So, and I think that has to do because, there's a bit of like slower early growth, but it's much more like it's not that interesting for a large corporate to enter because, it's very hard, for example, to establish a fish farm at the moment, let's say where we are and aim to produce 10,000 tons in 3 years. Because the whole landscape is a bit different, right? So that makes it really, really interesting for smallholders. It's the natural organic development that we have seen. So this is just a picture to show these are the first small-scale fish farmers that are near our area in Kigoma, near Tanganyika Blue. Then from an investment perspective, there's also particular risks and challenges, obviously. So, at the moment we see the biggest need. What we have to do now is really we have to do a breeding program. We have to develop the species, domesticate it. To give the people around the lake the opportunity to farm fish profitably. So I think that's one of the most imminent things that we, or the people interested in the whole sector, all the organizations, all our partners should actually look into, because without this, it's not possible. It will very likely be that invasive species will come into the lake. And then another challenge is obviously the complex regulatory situation. So you have 4 riparian countries, Tanzania, Burundi, Congo, Zambia, which makes things sometimes, like obviously there's a lot of dialogue that needs to take place. But we're very convinced of like with the whole process because the Lake Tanganyika Authority, it's an organization that has been put into effect by the 4 riparian countries, I think 2 decades ago. And they do a really good job at pushing these kind of things around the 4 countries so that we can have transboundary legislation around aquaculture. Yeah, and then obviously we also face all the challenges that the whole industry faces anywhere else in on the planet, and specifically also in Sub-Saharan Africa. One thing that I would like to mention is, I think what really helped us is that on the electricity side, so obviously you need a bit of electricity to run a farm like that. The solar has been very, very helpful, and the declining prices of solar is something that has to be considered when looking at the sector. So thinking a bit about, like, where do I see where the Native Species Aquaculture Alliance can come in? I think this was actually mentioned before also by Alex. So I think there could be a really good opportunity to develop a modern breeding program that is basically very adapted to these kind of settings like Lake Tanganyika, and then make it public goods and make it available to other regions, other sectors, other private, public stakeholders, so that this can be replicated easily. Then I think facilitation of dialogue, bring partners together, could be another aspect. And then the last one obviously is of interest for us also. That's what Annemarie mentioned. That would be really helpful. So building a portfolio, building a database of projects, of companies that are actually doing something in the native species aquaculture space. Thanks a lot. That was it from my side.
Thank you, Severin, for the investment perspective. There's a lot of potential as we learned. And here are Severin's contact details if you want to reach out. Dr. Imani, karibu sana.
I'm Imani Kapinga from, I'm working with the TNC, the Nature Conservancy, as a Lake Tanganyika Sustainable Development and Aquaculture Specialist, previously working with the government in research and management capacity. That's why you had Alex and Severin was mentioning my name several times. So I'm delighted to be here and talk to you about the TNC conservation efforts in policy and how TNC uses scientific research data to inform policy, guide where and how to farm native fish species, and monitor aquaculture practices in the using Lake Tanganyika work as an example. We all know that Lake Tanganyika is a shared water bodies by 4 riparian countries: Burundi, DRC, Tanzania, and Zambia. So that one we use as a case study on how we are doing this. Next slide, please. The Nature Conservancy is a non-profit international organization. It's in more than 80 countries, and our mission is to conserve land and water on which all life depends. We know that it's either you depend on your life in water or land. Next slide. We are guided by our 2030 goals. So for this case, we conserve wet fresh water, and we are helping people front lines of climate crisis. We know that among many other causes of depletion of wild stock from our natural water bodies is climate change. So aquaculture is potential alternative or complementing the wild production to make sure that the gap that is the consumption gap and production gap is covered from aquaculture. We are also working alongside local leaders who are lighting the way. We know that we cannot work together. We are working with the government. We are also partnering with other companies, research institutions, and the rest, including private companies like Sustain and Tanganyika Blue. Yes, our strategies to reach our 2030 goals is also to provide resilient freshwater, thriving fisheries, and regenerative food, and where aquaculture comes in. How TNC works, we are really based, normally we evidence-based science. We use scientific information and proof to drive a policy. So we get the findings, we get the proof before we advise for policy, maybe amendments, new policies, or even regulatory framework. We're also working with the companies. That's why we are also here, partnering with people in local communities. We are embracing technology and innovation. That's why we even use the tools, financing and investment, and inspiring the next generation of conservation leaders. Next slides, please. Yeah, why native species? Because we have been talking about native species on our conservation work. We really need to promote the farming of native species first. Because of environmental and conservation benefits, we want to minimize and abate any possible negative effects of non-native. We know that when you introduce new species, you are more likely to disrupt the ecosystem, because the native species are already adapted to the environment. You bring new species which are not adapted, and then they come with their own genetics. You can have even issues of crossbreeding and the rest. So we are trying to avoid that, and we see other, yes, from the next slide. Next. And to take this matter seriously, like what Alex and Abby said, we have our intergovernmental regional body, Lake Tanganyika Authority. So the 4 riparian countries agreed in 2015 that we have to put this into writing and maybe to enforce it, to have a legal backup that in the Lake Tanganyika, we have to use native species. So, and we know that in Tanzania, in Burundi, Congo, and Zambia, Orochromys niloticus is almost everywhere, and it's easy to get the fingerlings and the seed from different hatcheries. So that's why we came very specific that the 4 countries agree that we are not going to use these Orochromys niloticus because it's non-native for Lake Tanganyika. Next slide. And instead, we are promoting the use of Orochromys tanganyika in Lake Tanganyika. And this is the species that our farmers are using there, including Sustain and Tanganyika Blue and other small-scale farmers. Next slide, please. We also have socioeconomic benefit. We have seen this. There's even effort by government that they're supporting they've created special credit facilities for small-scale farmers that we have started with the pilot cages, 16, and the cages, it's only native fish species that is promoted, and they have been guided. It's not that they are doing alone with the best management practices. So apart from them getting social economic benefits, but they're also protecting the ecosystem. They're benefiting from it without harming or without causing any negative effects to the environment. And we have strong local market. We all know that. It's even that what is produced is far much below what is the demand is. And we also maintain traditional knowledge. That's very important. Next slide. Yes, also health and safety benefits. Contamination. Most of our native fish species are adapted to their natural environment, and even they have disease resistance. So most of the time, when you bring new species, they will come with their novel diseases, the diseases that they are not there originally there. So it's difficult to adapt first, and also they cause cross-contamination to the wild stock that they are originally there. And sometimes they might be forced to have to bring the use of chemicals to make sure that they are treating that, because there's no resistance for that new disease. So we really are trying to avoid that challenge. Next slide. So how are we integrating scientific research into policy implementation? Yeah, TNC have been working with the government agencies and the research across the 4 countries, and we are proud to say that we have a memorandum of understanding with the governments and the research institutions, some of them, and we are still on our way to have more from the other countries. We agree together. That's why you see that photo, that the governments, we have our intergovernmental bodies, LTA, we have representatives from the ministry, research institution. So we see how we are collaborating with the partner state and the government. Because without governments, it's not possible for you to work and even to inform policy and to make some changes in our policies. So we are using the tools that we see together and we agreed, like the ROMs already Severin was talking about, and site suitability and carrying capacity, because we know that we have to have beyond any reasonable doubt that these are the suitable sites for aquaculture. We don't want to to conduct aquaculture blindly, that people are putting cage anywhere or everywhere that they want. So we are very serious about that. And even the governments, we are lucky that the 4 governments are also very serious about that. So we are using scientific data, we are using ground truthing, the physical data collection, we are using models, partnering with the research institution to make sure that the decision or even the advice recommendation we made to the policy makers is accurate. We don't want to mislead. So we're also working together to develop monitoring, environmental monitoring plans, and to inform adaptive aquaculture management. We have this challenge of, we always talk native fish, but how many people are able to differentiate the species, especially when the fish is very young, the fingerlings? So people might really want to farm the native fish, but they don't know how to differentiate between the two because we have different species. So we want to work with the TAFIRI and the rest of research institutions to make sure that we are helping the extension officers, especially who are giving the permits or movement permits to the farmers, to make sure that this kind of fingerlings that this farmer is going to farm to stock is really Orochromis tanganyikae and not otherwise. So this is, that's what we are doing, collaborating with the government. Next slide. We are working together with the 4 governments to have the sustainable aquaculture guidelines, regional and harmonized, because since we are sharing our Lake Tanganyika, we don't want this country to use this regulation and the other one, this regulation in the same lake. So we are going to have the harmonized regional guideline aquaculture that is agreed. Scientific, that's why we started with the research, because we have to have scientific proof that this cage should stay not more than 5 meters or whatever case is. This one is suitable, this is not suitable. So we want to help that these people who are doing the stakeholders and the regulating bodies to mitigate potential environmental impacts of aquaculture by having these appropriate aquaculture guidelines, not only guidelines, but appropriate according to the proof that we got scientifically. Next slide. Oh, yes, TNC have been able to collaborate with the 4 riparian countries, technically and financially, to develop, because initially we didn't have a harmonized kind of protocol or guideline. So we have started with this protocol, which is legal binding. So it's also giving us a leeway to develop harmonized guidelines. So, and now after signing the protocols, this protocol signed 2023, and the partner states that are now doing the ratification of regional aquaculture protocol. We have been engaging with the 4 governments, having the workshop together to see the progress, to see the challenges, and working them out. And we are in a good progress after finishing the ratification of that protocol. Now we are good to go with the guidelines. So there's strong engagement in the ownership by national fisheries and environmental authorities. Yeah, before thank you. What we are as TNC, what we really see that what NSAA can do from the scientific and the conservation and policy angle to standardize biodiversity monitoring packages for native fish species farms, and also to provide evidence that can be used by governments and the regional bodies to design better regulation. That's what I've been talking about. So I wanted to cement on what I've been talking about. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Imani, for taking us into that policy angle a bit further. And now we're on to David from Lake Malawi Aquaculture. David, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Annemarie. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. I hope you can hear me clearly. Yeah, my name is David Nkhwazi, and I'm the founder and managing director of Lake Malawi Aquaculture. Of course, it's a partnership that we have between our company and a Norwegian company called Willing Hands. And just to give you a bit of background, I come from the ornamental fish export background. So my family has been in the ornamental fish export business for 50 plus years. So we've been shipping fish all around the world for quite some time. And as a means of diversification in terms of our businesses, I decided to go into fish farming. So I partnered with a company out of Norway called Willing Hands, and we formed Lake Malawi Aquaculture. Now, I don't know how much you know about Lake Malawi, but it's kind of similar to Lake Tanganyika, only that Lake Tanganyika only has 300 species or so of freshwater fish, whereas Lake Malawi has over 1,000 species of fish. So Lake Malawi has a very, very diverse, number of species, which are all endemic to Lake Malawi. Our fish farm, Lake Malawi Aquaculture, which you can see, I think, in the slide there, is based in Senga Salima, in the central region of Malawi, and pretty much, I think, we are the ones that are, pioneering this cage culture. There used to be a farm, or rather, it's another farm that has been there for a while in the southern side. But I think of late, the activities slowed down, that they're also coming back. But we're seen as the larger farm on Lake Malawi at the moment. The species that we're culturing at the moment is Orochromis chiranus, which is an indigenous species. Lake Malawi, in Malawi, by law, we're not allowed to introduce any foreign species into the lake. So we have to work with the local species. And I myself am someone who promotes the use of local species as opposed to introducing foreign species into Lake Malawi because of all the things that have been said by the previous presenters. I must say that most of the things that Alex spoke about and Dr. Imani, about Lake Tanganyika pretty much apply to Lake Malawi. So there's there's lots of similarities over there. Like I said, why do we farm native species? Firstly, it's because we're not allowed to introduce foreign species into Lake Malawi. However, we do support the production of local species into Lake Malawi. And I think Lake Malawi, the Orochromis chiranus, is very delicious fish. I mean, I've tried it. The market is very receptive to it. And we also look forward to it going into the export market. Next slide. Yeah, the key lessons that I can talk about in terms of commercializing chiranus is there's been quite of a challenge. I mean, our projections, or rather our farm, has a capacity to produce about 500 metric tons of fish. However, we've been short of that target, and simply because of the issue to do with fingerlings. Fingerlings availability, and also, the quality of the fingerlings, and also the size variation. So when we were coming onto the market, since we don't have our own hatchery, we had to acquire fingerlings from the market. So we did face those challenges that I've mentioned, which more or less affected our production. So I would say we started farming in October of 2024, and like I said, we're a fairly new farm. But as of March 2025 this year, that's when we had started selling our fish. So we've been selling our fish from March to date, and I think so far we've sold about 55 tons of our fish. So it's progressing steadily, but there's still quite a lot of work to be done in terms of acquiring fingerlings and having that done steady. In terms of feed conversion ratios, we're currently at about 1.6. So that's not the local species not doing so badly. I know that some work has been done on the local species, so we're not, we've moved several generations down. So the fingerlings, are quite good, but we just have to take care of those particular issues that have to do with sizes, quality, and availability in terms of quantities. Next slide, please. Cage culture is quite new to Lake Malawi. So when we were starting, we had to do a lot of community engagement. So prior to starting our project, we made sure that we do, the environmental and social impact assessment, and on the social aspect, we engaged all the communities, the beach village communities, and the like, so that they could understand what was happening. So having done that, we haven't seen any issues really with the communities, because they're aware of the project and what is happening. And of course, for some of the community members, there have been some opportunities in terms of them becoming traders, buying our fish and trading them, to markets within the district and also further out. And of course, we're in an area that has a lot of resorts. So just like Lake Tanganyika, Lake Malawi is overfished, and the hotels or the resorts cannot get access to to quality fish, and us coming onto the market scene has given them the availability of that fish, so they have the fish back on their menu, and we're getting very good reviews from that. Next slide, please. In terms of the environmental and regulatory aspects, like I've said, the Department of Fisheries is the one that monitors our activities, and they do carry out regular water tests around our cage sites. And also, we work very closely with the department, since we're one of the pioneers in terms of developing guidelines for cage culture. So we've developed guidelines for cage culture earlier this year that are going to be used by those who want to get into cage culture into Lake Malawi. We've also worked very closely with the department in terms of and also the academia in terms of developing hatchery guidelines. And as we speak, we are scaling up our fish farm. So because of the issues that we saw with with fingerlings, we're now working on setting up our own hatchery. So beginning of next year, once everything goes through, we'll be setting up our own hatchery to support our cages, and also at the same time, to support the the community in terms of those that are looking for fingerlings. We'll also be increasing increasing the cages that we have in our lake. Next slide. So that's another shot that you can see of the cages that we have on our lake and one of our staff. I think, like I said, we're moving into a scale-up phase. So we're setting up a hatchery and also increasing the number of cages. I think our initial investment that we've done on the fish farm was about $1.5 million. And then, we also went in to get some debt capital of just under $500,000. And now the next phase that we're doing now is just under $2 million. So, we expect that with this injection, our production could actually move from our projected 500 metric tons to close to 1,000 metric tons. Our target is to do about 5,000 metric tons within the next 3 to 5 years. So that is what's happening in terms of our planning. Yeah, so basically, that's what I can say about the Lake Malawi aquaculture, and I'm very thankful to Severin, who I've met several times at the conferences in Tunisia and also in Uganda, for inviting me to join the NSAA, and I look forward to working with you as partners. I mean, we've got similar issues on the water bodies. I know very, very good presentations on Lake Tanganyika, and very similar challenges that are over there, but also lots of opportunities that are available. Particular things that I would like to mention about Malawi is that, like most African countries, we have challenges when it comes to foreign currency, and that affects our importation of feed into the country, and also in terms of bringing in our equipment. But if we can enhance local production, which will substitute imports, okay, then we begin to tackle that issue of externalization of forex, and that brings in more and more opportunities. I mean, the lake has got very high quality water, just like Alex said, Lake Tanganyika. I mean, of course, the lake is rough. Okay, we get about 3 meter high waves, and that calls for for the investment of high quality equipment that can take that kind of rough weather. So if you look at our cages over there, just to give you in terms of sizes, I mean, our cages are 25 meters in diameter by 8 meters deep. So those are some huge cages which can take up to about currently on this lake that can withstand the kind of weather patterns that we have. But otherwise, the water quality is great. Also, the fish is delicious. I'm yet to taste Orochromys tanganyika, but I'll tell you what, Orochromys Shiranus is very delicious. The hotels love it. Everyone who's buying it loves it. And also, I mean, we have a lot of species. So there's lots of opportunities in terms of us developing further species for domestication and fish farming. And I just look forward to us, working together and moving this partnership forward. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, David. And you're welcome in Kigoma, then we can try your fish as well and see if it's better than Tanganyika tilapia. Thank you for that. Right, and then last but not least, Dr. Suleiman, over to you. I think you've got your own slides, so I'll just stop sharing and you're welcome to start sharing your screen.
I'm Dr. Suleiman Ihiabe. My background is reproduction and genetics of fish from the University of Stirling. I've been involved with catfish genetics for a while, and delving into tilapia. That's just briefly about me, and we just go straight into the presentation. Yeah, so native species are predominantly unimproved. Okay, Severin, you just be tapping one after the other. So they're characterized with poor uneven growth, unpredictable growth, poor FCR, poor adaptation to culture environment. So most native species at the beginning, there's a lot of unknown information about them. Okay. In order to conserve and contribute, and also to compete with the non-native aquaculture species, there's need for domestication and selection. So when we say domestication here, collecting wild samples, confining the samples, getting them to get used to feeding in aquaculture condition, and then closing the life cycle by way of getting them to spawn in captivity. All right, but when we talk about selection here, we're looking at collecting representative samples from different locations within a set water body, produce synthetic population, and produce successive generations from those synthetic generations upon which selection will be based. Most selections often at the beginning starts with focus on growth performance, feed conversion ratio, adaptation to culture environment, so that's G by E, and then survival. At a later stage, carcass quality, disease resistance, and other high-end traits begin to come in. Now, This is especially possible now because molecular tools or genetic tools are more affordable and there's more advancement and more accessible now. So, Orochromys Tanganyika, my involvement with this is with sustain and future fish in Lake Tanganyika. So my role is to improve the performance of this species optimally without altering the biota. Okay, so during my first visit, I assessed the stock in Lake Tanganyika, or the farm stock with sustain at Tanganyika Blue. I looked at the infrastructure, the capacity, and the readiness to go into breeding program. So we developed a short-term breeding plan in which we looked at several things. Theoretically, we've segmented Lake Tanganyika into 5 segments where we collect samples. Each segment represents a population. Okay, so we collect 5 different populations, and then the farmed strain currently in Tanganyika Blue would serve as the 6th population upon which we intend to start. Now we use that sequence, that means diversity array technology sequencing, to assess the genetic relatedness and also the population structure between the 5 wild strain and also the 1 farmed strain. So from there, foundation population will be gotten. So we'll be collecting 500 individuals per segment. So that's 2,500 from the lake and also 500 individuals from the farm strain. So we have a total of 3,000. But 60 of the best individuals from each population will be selected, and then that will go into the pairing. So we'll have 360 individuals going into the pairing, and 180 families will be produced. We'll be employing both pedigree and mass selection. 36 out of the 180 families, we're going to select the best, the top 36 families, and then the top 10% from mass selections. This will use to form our synthetic base population upon which the entire breeding program is going to hinge. A SNP panel will be developed at this stage after forming the synthetic population. So that would aid in parentage assignment and also would help us when we estimate breeding values and heritabilities of different traits. So selection would continue from one generation to another. Okay. So we're a bit ambitious in this project in that we're starting from as low as 350 grams per fish in the first base population. And then we hope at the 5th generation to attain slightly above 500 grams per fish. In the FCR, we're starting at 1.7 at the moment. We hope with genetics and then advancement also in feed tech, we'll be able to push the FCR down to just above 1. The survival rates and the hatcheries are currently at 75%. We hope to drive that up to 95%. Survival rates in grow out is about 95%. We hope to push that up to 98%. Now, this is based on modeling, and as we start, we'll adjust. At the moment, the key target is Orochromys niloticus. We hope to push Orochromys tanganyika closely to Orochromys niloticus with the breeding program. So the cost drivers, breeding programs are quite expensive. There's high capex, cost of the infrastructure like the ponds, the cages, and also the hatchery. The operating cost is also quite high. You look at the cost of holding several nucleus population, also tagging DNA analysis and bioinformatics, and then personnel costs. You need expertise to drive a breeding program, and then you need also on-farm staff to manage from generation to generation. Okay, so in conclusion, as high as the cost is, the benefits far outweigh the cost. If you look at where the gift tilapia is today and where it started, it's amazing and how many countries have benefited from the genetic improvement as a result of that, and how many commercial operations there are. So genetic improvement of native species can go a long way in increasing aquaculture production, increasing food and nutritional security, reducing poverty, and increasing diversified sources of income. Thank you very much for the time and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Suleiman. Thank you for those insights. Yeah, thank you to all our speakers for providing your various insights from various angles and the case studies as well. It's really good to see how research, commercial farming, and investment perspectives can come together. Maybe Dr. Rohana, we can start with a question for you. It's quite a broad one, but do you see any other major regions where you see the potential to introduce native species aquaculture? And would that complement or rather be a trade-off with the existing aquaculture that focuses more on invasive species?
Thank you. Interesting question, not an easy answer. I think for anywhere, use of a native species for aquaculture, there is a case. But when you see aquaculture as a business, whatever you're going to do eventually has to be sustainable and profitable. Environment is very important, keeping everything intact, being environmental integrity, various aspects. But at the moment, if you're talking about commercial aquaculture, it has to be profitable. So and if you're talking about using a native species in a country where introduced species are doing well in aquaculture, maybe the commercial interest for using a native species might be less. Whereas the countries there are no introduced species are sort of used, and yet there is a lot of interest in aquaculture and improving production and providing fish for people. Yes, the native species will become important and are important. I think the opportunity, as we heard this morning from almost everyone, is to use it because it is safe to use. It protects the environment. It doesn't bring additional risks into the system. And of course, it will provide a lot of opportunity and benefits to people around. At the same time, the opportunity to improve and make the systems more efficient and effective through technology improvement and research and knowledge development. I think there are I myself come from Sri Lanka originally. We brought Oreochromis niloticus to Sri Lanka. That was that long time back, I think 1953, first time introduced tilapia. And tilapia has become an excellent candidate which established in the aquatic system in Sri Lanka without replacing any species or not making any major biodiversity or environmental impacts. There are places at the same time. If we had a better fish, we wouldn't have brought it in. Right? At that time, there was no much technology either. Right? I think the situation has changed. Native species are important and can be used even parallel, provided that we can make them competitive. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rohana, for that answer. Yeah, if we focus on this commercial aspect and it needing to make commercial sense as well to focus on native species, maybe a question for David and Alex. Where have you felt the biggest friction in trying to raise capital for your native species farms? Because you're actually implementing this concept. And what, from your experience, what has worried investors the most? And how could maybe also through the Native Species Aquaculture Alliance, how could we help to address those investor worries? If one of you wants to answer, or both, you're welcome.
All right. Thanks once again, Annemarie. I mean, raising capital, has been quite a challenge, simply because, every investor who, has interest in aquaculture, when the tilapia, talks about niloticus. So if you talk to them about Oreochromis chiranus, they want you to give them data in terms of growth rates and things like that. which in success stories and the like. And if you're pioneering, starting off, as a greenfield project, it's been very tough. So I can tell you, we started this concept in 2019, just before COVID, but we only got to start the farm last year. So that's how long it took, 5 years for us to, to put this project together. However, what we discovered and what we, how we got ahead was that we had to put some significant skin in the game. So in other words, we had to put in our own capital. So, we acquired the cages and the like, and we put them in the lake. And then we said, okay, when this equipment is in the lake, that's when we'll start looking for money. So at least we had something to show to the, to the investors. And in terms of investment for us, it was debt capital, not actually equity. So having shown that and them having seen that, there was some assets that they could get as collateral for the facilities, they were able to give us something to start with as working capital. So that's what it's been like. That's why we started very slow. But now that we have proved the concept, the same providers are now coming in for a second round for us to scale up, our production, and also to take care of the other issues that we had that I mentioned. I talked about to do with fingerlings and the like. So that's basically how, how we've handled our issues. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Alex, have your challenges been similar or different, unlike
Yeah,
Tanganyika?
for sure. I mean, I think that the first point David makes there about, when you talk to investors familiar with aquaculture, they immediately speak about the species and Niloticus, and they want to see, the data. They want to talk about FCR of Tanganyika or whatever. And, as we say, when we're doing pioneering work, when you're doing first of its kind work, it's first of a kind for nature, by its very nature. So for us, raising capital has been, I can sort of split the interest we have, or the people I talk to, into, fish people and non-fish people. And the fish people, all they want to talk about the species, but non-fish people, they never want to talk about the species. I think they don't sort of realize how important the sort of the species is to these things. So, and the non-fish, and both of those groups still have the same concerns about greenfield projects in remote parts of Africa. They're not the most, capital sexy, attractive things going around. So it's always a challenge. I think in terms of, that's where we see the NSAA longer term playing a role, is to be able to show some case studies of what success looks like for a native species project. So if we can, and it goes to Samuel's question in the chat there as well, if we can show that a breeding program can have performance improvements over 3, 4, 5, 6 generations of fish, then that can be used as something that other people trying to pioneer this approach in other geographies can show as well. Yeah, I think that's about it.
Yeah, thank you, Suleiman. Maybe straight a question for you, if that's okay, because you mentioned the high capex, for example, and the OPEX as well. But where is the biggest skills gap you see today in terms of selective breeding programs? Like, is it from geneticists, farm technicians, data management? And is there a way that you would like, or you think the NSAA could most usefully help you to close, or just help us to close that gap?
I think the first gap would be in terms of the geneticist. They are not much that are used to some of these native species, and then not used to the ecosystem. There are lots of geneticists you can find in Europe, but not used to Africa. And, so bringing that closely, having local geneticists, that would help go a long way. And also transferring the skills. So it's one thing to have the expertise, but you're not domiciled in that country, but have very good, capable hands on site to make sure families are kept separately and are managed, without any bias. And then during the DNA analysis also, we source, like, for me, I usually send samples to Australia to do, because it's cheaper. And then I get good results from them, and then they work more effectively in terms of time. So if we can have that close to us, I think that would also bring costs down and also increase access to selective breeding. Answer the
Great,
question.
thank you. Yeah, that answers it for sure. And if you compare a modern breeding program with what farms typically do today, so just selecting the biggest fish, for example, what are the things that make it different?
So, when farms just select the biggest fish, it's not based on genetics. Okay, that size can just be a temporary thing. The heritability for that growth trait that is selected on the farm without actually looking at the molecular part could just have a very low heritability, and you go a few generations and it flattens out. You also can predict with molecular tools now. You can predict what future generations would look like. You're also able to select to also assess breeding value. So for instance, if a male fish has a very good quality and you've crossed with a female, for instance, and that female has a poor quality, the offspring turns out good, right? You don't know which of the parents is responsible for that. With molecular tools, you'll be able to trace the family back to the parents and tell which parents has that very good quality. So that's why when we cross, we do what we call the allele cross. So one male, we try to cross with several females, and the female also is crossed by several males. And then you're able to assess the breeding value. Even when you do what we call communal rearing. So you do communal rearing when you want to completely eliminate bias. You pull all the fish from the different families together. When you raise them for 6 months and you harvest them and you set a threshold to select the big ones, right? It's difficult if you don't have molecular tools or modern genetic tools to trace that particular selection back to the family. So to tell which crosses actually give rise to those big ones. Are they coming from a single family, multiple families, or how did they come about? So with modern genetic tools, you're able to see everything clearly, and then you model the future.
Thank you for that, Suleiman. And now going back to kind of all the speakers, and we'll just have a few more questions for you. Dr. Imani, you mentioned the ROMS model, and so did Severin. Could you tell us a little bit more about that? Is that something that's actively being used at the moment, or what's the process there? And can we consider that as like the holy grail to figure out how much can be produced sustainably? Or what are your predictions with the ROMS model? And Severin, feel free to add on afterwards as well.
Hi, thank you very much.
Hi.
Yes, yeah, this is kind of it's a new model, but it has been successful in Lake Victoria, where even TNC participated under the True Fish Project. But the challenge that we have, we don't have many experts on that. Now we are relying on one expert who is also going to develop, who is working with TNC, the one who did in Lake Victoria, and it's the same we are working with, because we have contract with him in Lake Tanganyika. The good thing about that is kind of giving the hydrodynamics, currents, and nutrients fluctuation. It's giving you indication that maybe you are more likely to have polluted water, or and maybe they have I don't know how to say it, but the water quality is going to be affected, or maybe you have to move, maybe you don't give license to this place because it has these challenges. So it's kind of taking into consideration many parameters, and it's giving you even the seasonal prediction, because now you know that during this season, it's not a good time for having this maybe cage aquaculture. Maybe the winds are too strong during this season. So maybe it will require you to have a technical or maybe more extra facilities to make sure that you don't get lost. So it's kind of giving the information to policymakers, even farmers. This is not the right season. Maybe in this coming month, the water quality is going to be tempered. We have issues. We have heard in Lake Victoria that people got massive loss of fish. And a lot of people in the beginning, people saw that maybe people are putting maybe toxins or some other issues, but it was kind of fluctuation. Because you have to know this time during this period, the current is this direction, maybe the water mixing, nutrients. So it's kind of, it will also help because we are complementing it with the ground truthing that the Tafiri are going to do, like water collection during that period. So it's kind of helping you. And this one, it takes into many consideration for you to get more accurate information, because different depths will be seen, and this area is not suitable because of this, and it's giving you the index that this is the most suitable, that's extremely suitable, this one is suitable. So, and you keep on, you can update after a year or 3 years every time. And what we are doing at TNC, collaborating with the government and the LTA, is to build capacity within our scientists from the riparian countries, and we are going to have the capacity building training in January to make sure that for riparian countries, they're not going to depend on one person when the issues comes. So every time they'll be updating the government, maybe this season we have to move this, don't give license or permit to this area now, it's not suitable. And because suitability, it might be suitable this year, but after 2 years, there are a lot of factors that can make it unsuitable. So it's kind of, I don't want to talk into too many details, but this is highlight of what the model is working.
Thank you, Dr. Imani. Severin, anything to add on to that?
Just maybe to emphasize, I mean, Imani mentioned it pretty clearly, but I mean, yes, it feels like it's the holy grail, but I think, so I'm not a scientist that like works on this every day. But I think what's really also important is the whole ground truthing stuff. And that's where existing projects, existing farms like the smallholder farmers, but also Tanganyika Blue can really help, because we take very consistent measurements like water quality and all that stuff. And that really helps to, also improve these large scale models. Yeah, and at the moment there's not a lot of data. So that will be very important, I think, over the next few years. So working together with farms, pioneer farms, to collect as much data as possible to improve the models and stuff. Yeah.
Thank you, Severin. Okay, great. We'll move on to the Q&A with some of the questions from the chat, because I've seen that they've been coming in. Samuel from Worldfish Zambia, Alex, you briefly mentioned this as well in your answer, but if you wanted to expand or someone else would like to answer, he says, I feel that your plan to improve the genetics of O. Tanganyika to the level of O. Neoticus in 5 years is very ambitious. What breeding strategies do you intend to implement? If anyone has an answer for Samuel, you're welcome.
I think Samuel also asked the question before Suleiman did his presentation. So I hope
that's true.
Part of the question was answered. I guess it's ambitious, but like from our side, so we have talked with many organizations, and like we also put a range on on like different scenarios and stuff. But like especially with the modern tools, like also being quite cheap now, like there's potential that we can really improve the species pretty fast. It's also like, it's remarkable that the species, it's not domesticated, but it actually grows pretty well for that. So I'm often, when I talk to other aquaculture people, I'm often also like stating, how do we actually know that Niloticus is the best species, or is going to be the best species in 10 years from now? So just to put that out there, I think Tanganyika, or also Shiranus, or even Karongai, also from Lake Malawi, they have shown pretty good potential also to be improved and grow, who knows, maybe even better than Niloticus in a decade or two.
Yeah, thank you. And then a question from Jonas Walker. For the discussed region, so mainly Lake Tanganyika, do you also see other species, non-tilapia SPP, suitable for larger scale aquaculture systems? Who wants
Otherwise,
to
I
answer?
can go ahead again,
question?
but I don't want to.
Yeah.
I mean, Suleiman would surely say catfish, sure, which also has a lot of potential in the region, also in Lake Tanganyika. So actually, the Cariepinus, the Clarias, is native in the lake also. And then, like in Lake Tanganyika, we also have a couple of other species that are interesting. So one is I don't know how to pronounce the Latin scientific name, but you can look it up. It's called emperor cichlid. In Swahili, it's called kuhe. It's a very like large. Well, it's basically the largest cichlid in the lake, and it also has a very good, like on the market. It's the highest value fish normally. The downside with that species is that breeding hasn't really been figured out yet. Seems to be a bit tricky, and also it's a carnivorous species. So from the juvenile stage where it's still like omnivorous, eating everything basically, then the growing larger it becomes carnivorous. So then your feed would potentially be more expensive probably.
Yeah, and if I may come in, Annemarie, even on Lake Malawi, I think there is I think we went into Orochromys chiranus because there were some fingerlings available on the market and it had been proven to grow, but we had to show that we can do it. We couldn't just go in and start with species that had not been domesticated. But like I said, we have 1,000 different species, and we've got open water, sort of like swimming, catfish. The local name is called Campango. If that can be domesticated, then that would be a very, very good candidate. For fillets, it's very tasty. I mean, we've got Lake Malawi salmon, which only drawback is that it's got lots of bones. But my Norwegian friends think that we could do something with it because they really like it, and it's got red meat and it resembles the salmon from the North Sea. And then, of course, just with the tilapian species, I mean, we've got the Chiranus, we've got the Karong, Orochromys karungai as well, where some work has been done with that. So then there's another two different species. So there's a lot of species to work with. There's a lot of exciting work that that will be done. And we hope that when our hatchery is up and running, we can work with the likes of Dr. Suleiman, in genetic improvement programs. So yeah, let's be ambitious. And I think in the next few years, we should be able to beat Niloticus, just like Severin has said. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Next question from Samuel again, but do you plan to tag individual fish or use SNPS? Probably
So
one
I'll
more
take-
for the commercial farms or
Yes, I'll take that. So we're planning two strategies. There's the pedigree breeding program and there's a mass selection. So family selection, mass selection. So for family selection, we may or may not tag the individual fish, but we tag the broodstock. But for the mass selection, because we'll be doing communal rearing in cages, we tag the fish. So, but in everything, we still develop SNP panels. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Stephen asks whether we are going to be focusing on transgenic. Are we planning to include other regions or academia which have experts in fish genetics, to enhance improvement?
Yeah, Annemarie, if I may come in, I think, like I said, we're not only looking at Lake Tanganyika, right? That's why we've got Lake Malawi on this forum as well. And, with the main reason that we're getting our hatchery is because we wanted to work on further genetic improvement of species, and also work with other species on the lake, like I just said earlier on. So the focus is not only Lake Tanganyika, but also Lake Malawi. Yeah.
And on the transgenic part, this is obviously always a discussion, but in general, like I think we all agree on this panel, that it's not really something that we are looking at. I think it's also on the regulatory side, policy side. Yeah, that's a very tricky discussion, and it also goes into the next comment from Jonah, which I think is a very excellent point. Because I think once you work with GMO or anything like that, there's probably much higher risk that you create a native species that actually has a similar kind of bad impact as if you introduce something.
So I can comment.
Very open. Yeah, Suleiman, sorry.
Yes, I quite agree with Severin. The answer is no. Remember, this tilapia or Chromis tanganyika, they'll be raised in cages. And there's mixing between what's in the cage and what's in the ecosystem. So you don't want to introduce transgenic fish into the environment. So I just focus on selective breeding.
Yes, so we will be, based on what we've discussed today and where we would want the NSAA to go, we will be sharing with you in the next few days a charter of intent, based on the discussions and inputs from today. And then we will do an information call in a week or two as well on this database initiative. And it would be great if you want to get involved in that and share your projects that are related to native species. And then, further into 2026, we will hopefully be producing this white paper collaboratively with anyone who wants to get involved. And just as a reminder, this is only the launch phase now. And for now, Tanganyika Blue and Sustain will be kind of hosting the secretariat. But we are very happy if some of you as early contributors want to join a steering committee as well.